In episode 1 of Fat Joe Talks, the Bronx rapper and Method Man discuss the limits that were placed on them as hip-hop artists in the 90s and 2000s, how they couldn't show their true personalities and always had to appear tough for the cameras. But those days are long gone, says host Fat Joe. Not in 2024, he tells The Hollywood Reporter. 2024 is all about showing who you are and what your personality is. Positivity is the aspect of his identity Fat Joe is most interested in showing these days. It's why he worked with Stars to launch his new interview series, which has been airing weekly since its October Jordan Jew debut. So far, he's chatted with Omari Hardwick, Mary J. Blige, LL Cool J, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries about their influence on pop culture. Everything you see in Fat Joe Talks is positivity and uplifting the people and giving them inspiration and motivation, Fat Joe tells THR. This ain't the show where you're going to see clickbait or drama and things of that nature. It's also why he declines to comment on the current allegations against Diddy and their potential impact on the music industry and hip-hop culture when asked. An unsurprising decision when you consider his stance on the relationship between the media and entertainers. You got to think about it. You're an artist. You took the time out to go do an interview with a journalist. The last thing you want to do is go sit down in front of them, and they jam you up and start with clickbait and rumors about you, he explains. You got to think about what's been happening to artists for years and years. Below, Fat Joe shares further thoughts on hip-hop journalism, presidential candidates tapping rap artists for their campaigns, and rappers endorsing Trump, as well as his plans for new music and the realities of aging in the rap industry. What made you create Fat Joe Talks, and what do you want to bring to this show that's different from other shows out there? It started in COVID on my Instagram. My daughter told me to go live, so I went on live and talked to the people, and then the next day she told me to do the same thing. The next thing I had a TV show on Instagram. Whoever you name, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Mike Tyson, Floyd Mayweather, I had them all on the show, and Stars contacted me and said, this could be a real TV show, and we started negotiating since then. The whole concept of Fat Joe Talks is turning the negative into a positive, like Biggie used to say. This is all about everybody's real-life experience. It's how they grew up, what they went through. How did they become icons? How do they shift the culture? This is all upliftment. This ain't no shock jock. That's the biggest difference between this show and any other show on TV, especially that's hip-hop oriented. A lot of former rappers are finding success with podcasts and interview shows, Joe Budden and Noriega, for example. Why do you think that is in this moment? It's time that we grew up into the commentating role. If you look at basketball, you'll see Charles Barkley, Hall of Famer Shaquille O'Neal, Kenny Smith. These are all the famous players who did it, put time in the game and understand the game from every lens. So it's only right that Cameron and Macy have a show, Nore has the Noman One show, and Joe Budden has a show. These are people who lived through it. People know them and trust them. So they tune in. Did you talk to any of them for tips? Nah, I know what to do. I'm going for Oprah, man. That's the only person who can give me a tip. There's a large conversation being had about the current state of hip-hop journalism and entertainment journalism in general, the sentiment being that artists would rather create content with influencers and streamers than be interviewed by journalists. Is that true? I believe it's true. I also believe that the old guard of hip-hop journalists created a lot of conflict and might even have blood on their hands. When you talk about East Coast, West Coast, Biggie Tupac, that thing was amplified, and they both ended up dead. And when I look at the so-called journalists that were here from day one, since Vibe and The Source and all that, still to this day when they interview people and they do podcasts themselves, it's always a negative route. These were the people when we didn't have social media or podcasts. They were controlling the game, and it was always a negative narrative. Back in the day, if you didn't get shot 9 times, or went to jail for 10 years, they wouldn't consider you a good rapper. It was terrible. So I kind of agree with the young boys and young girls. They're saying get your message out there however you want, and where you feel comfortable, where people ain't out here to jam you up. That's why I did Fat Joe Talks, so we could talk about exactly what the artist wants to talk about in a positive light. I used to go to interviews, and they'd be like, Joe, what's up with rapper X? I never even met the brother. And then, next thing you know, you got beef with rapper X over a journalist who wanted to create a hype. You recently interviewed Kamala Harris for the BET Hip Hop Awards. Yeah, that was cool. Were you intimidated at all? Nah, I know her, so I wasn't. I think the first or second time I ever hung out with Madam Vice President, I was a little nervous, but I see her all the time now. I'm not taking it for granted. I know she's the vice president, but I've seen her a bunch of times to the point where the butterflies wore off. Now I see her, and I go, hey, Ms. Vice President. Hey, ow. We chop it up. It's a little bit different. Both sides of the campaign have called on hip-hop stars to help get the word out. Why do you think rappers have become so coveted throughout this election period? Hip-hop is the voice of the people. You got to understand this art form started by oppressed people that had nothing, in a sense, became the CNN of the streets. So there's 2 ways to look at it. Sometimes when I see rappers get up there like, yeah, Trump is the best, I think black men have said they feel no one caters to their specific concerns during the election cycle. Is there a similar sentiment among Latino men? Latino men, they have a whole different set of rules. I wish we were much more aligned because if you got the Latinos and the black people voting the same way and looking at the world the same way, then we would be the most powerful force in America. So, what are your thoughts about this story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. This is 1 Minute Global News.